Welcome back, listeners, to a brand new episode of the New Standard. And you're checking out the program on Monday, April 22nd, 2024, just a couple of days before the NFL draft. And as always, listeners, if you want to chime into the program, make sure you give me a like and subscribe to Lance Williams. Also, you can go to YouTube, do a search for the New Standard and Lance Williams and Neil Coulon. You could do a search for us at Lance Williams, the New Standard, Neil Coulon, and the Steelers in whatever way in which you get your podcast and your podcast reader and feeder. The name of the program, and pick up to everybody out there that's joining us on the chat, is The Three Needs Problem. And I'm borrowing this title from an article on Behind the Steel Curtain. And it's sort of a play on the popular sci-fi series that just came out on Netflix, The Three Body Problem. And I think what it alludes to, and it's the article, let me give him his full credit, Ryan Parrish, and let me give full credit to the guys at Steel Curtain and Steel Curtain, Behind the Steel Curtain, who really support the program and our friends of the program, longtime friends of the program. So big up to them. And this kind of talks about three different draft scenarios in which the Steelers can go. I think when you look at this roster and you look at this team as we approach very rapidly the first round of the 2024 draft, I think you look at this team and you say, there are three apparent needs, the three needs problem. And let's frame it around that. And I think when you look at this team, I think one of the needs that jumps out, respond if you're wrong. Um, if you think I'm wrong, I should say. The center position, interior line, I think is an issue because they don't have a starter. Uh, they don't even have a replacement on the roster. I think they have one guy on the roster. Nobody knows his name. Um, Big up to Jeremiah Yoder. I agree. And I think wide receiver is an issue. You look at the depth chart, their best starter is George Pickens. Um, I think another issue on their team, um, when you look at their team and you look at the three needs, um, I think corner is a need as well, and I think wide receiver is a need. I think those are the issues. It's the center position, it's the wide receiver position. I think they have a need at tackle, and I think they have a need at corner. I think those are the needs. But the reason why I think it's the three need problem is because although if I had a say in this, I would urge the Steelers to draft a wide receiver in the first round. And given this staff and this history of the Steelers recently in being able to develop wide receivers, I don't think they're going to do that. I don't think they're going to do that in the first round. I think George Pickens is evidence of the fact that they feel like they can find wide receivers in the second round and lower and make those guys into outstanding players. We may not like him now, but Antonio Brown, perfect example. Juju Smith Schuster, another example. So you don't have to take wide receivers in the first round. And in fact, if you look at the Steelers' draft history, the highest rated wide receiver that they've taken in the last decade was Chase Claypool with the 49 pick. Even Deontay Johnson, their leading receiver over the last 3 years, was a third round pick. The last time they took a wide receiver in the first round, as I'm looking through their list, man, I didn't think it was that long, was Santonio Holmes in 2006. So I think, although I say this staff and the way Omar Khan does things and the way I think Mike Tomlin and his influence over the organization now that Kevin Colbert is out, it is really hard to predict what this regime is going to do. So I don't know if necessarily past history is going to be very important, but I'm going to use it still in my thoughts in terms of saying I don't think they grab a wide receiver. Again, still fans, you listen to the new standard, the three needs problem. Make sure you like and subscribe to the program and check out the podcast in your local podcast feed or your reader and do a search for the new standard and Steelers. So let's jump into a couple of the scenarios that they teased out in the article. Again, you can check out the article on Behind the Steel Curtain. It's called The Three Needs Problem. And the first scenario is they draft a tackle. We said the needs: tackle because of Dan Less, Dan Moore. Tackle's a need. Center is a need. And center. And wide receiver. You could also throw corner in there as well. Wide receiver. So those are your needs. So I think the three needs center around, though, in this scenario in the article are tackle. I think the other need here is drafting a corner, number one. And last but not least is drafting a center at number one. Now, if you look at the draft and the way he plays it out, and he writes it out in the article here, is that the first scenario he has the Steelers drafting Fashanu, tackle in the first round. And that they would have bookend tackles on both sides of the ball. Yes, this is live, Double H. They would have bookend tackles on both sides. And so if you take a first round tackle, I think that does address a need for sure. However, I think when you look at some of the metrics of the pass protection last year, in terms of adjusted sack rate, the Steelers were 10th. And by no means, is that great, but that's not bad. That's in the top third of the league. And so, in my opinion, I'm not sure that's the biggest and most urgent need that they have. I mean, we've talked about Dan Moore ad nauseum on this show, but I'm not sure you necessarily want to go tackle in the first round, because based on whatever the scheme is, I think you can scheme protect Dan Moore. There might be some scenarios and some situations where he's at odds, he's in a bad matchup, but I think you can scheme protect around him. Also, the reason why I think they may not go tackle in the first round is because we've seen them say that Broderick Jones is their left tackle of the future, not their right tackle. So it'll be interesting to see how this goes. Also, in this first scenario, in the second round, he has the Steelers drafting Ricky Pearsall out of Florida, a wide receiver. That addresses a need. And then he has them taking Kyrie Jackson and Cedric Van Pran out of Georgia. Those are the first four picks in that first scenario. Of course, Pearsall is a wide receiver, Kyrie Jackson is a cornerback, and Van Pran is a center. If you take those four positions, you are directly impacting the roster at need positions, at high value need positions, the tackle position, the wide receiver position, the corner position, the center position, not as valuable, I think, for other franchises, but historically, the center position is extremely valuable for the Steelers, given their history, given some of the guys that have played, Mansfield, Webster, Dermontti Dawson, Pouncey, Hardings. So the Steelers value the center position. If they went this route, I wouldn't be upset, because, your new quarterback room, I believe last year the guys took 80 sacks combined. You have a Russell Wilson. I think right now at this point in his career, he really needs to be protected. He needs pass protecting to see things clearly. I think he needs an extra tick to be able to do that. And I want to thank big up to Double H for the contribution. Yes, thank you, sir. I do appreciate it, my brother. And so that's one scenario. That's if they take the tackle first. The second scenario is taking a cornerback number one. And the cornerback he had selected was Cooper DeJean. The second round pick would be tackle Kingsland Sumiatea, cornerback Kyrie Jackson, and guard Cedric Van Pran. So again, when you look at, and then wide receiver, he had uh, Luke McCaffrey. This mock, I'm not really a fan of because I think when you look at the Steelers' offense, they have no really good solution. They have one good weapon at the wide receiver position. Outside of that, I think it's a desert. And you've got to replace the multitudes, the 100 plus targets that Deontay Johnson got. So what are you going to do? How are you going to replace those targets? How are you going to replace that production? Are you going to disperse those targets to, you know, more handoffs to the backs, more dump offs to the backs and the flats, more targets to Firemouth, more targets to Pickens? How do you redistribute all of those targets? And, adding Luke McCaffrey to a bad wide receiver room does nothing to me. If they went this route and took a wide receiver that late, I would only guess that they're trading for Brandon Ayuk and that the Brandon Ayuk trade happened. They have him. He's their number one, number two / receiver, and then they move on with that. Because I think if you slotted Brandon Ayuk on this team, it really upgrades the offensive weapons on this team. It's a significant boost in the arm to the offense if you were to add a Brandon Ayuk or another wide receiver of his caliber along with George Pickens. Then you could be creative in the slot and kind of get that production out of multiple people at the position. But I really don't think they need to take a corner at number one. And, I'm not going to go into how these players are rated because I haven't seen a lot of these guys. But, Cooper DeJean, I've heard some things about him. He's real straight line, incredible athlete, like a Terrell Edmonds, very high on his RAS. Big up to my guy, Mike. Mike Wolf. That was my bad Wolf impersonation. But let me jump into the last scenario here. And the last scenario is the Steelers draft a center. And the number one pick the guy he selected as the center, and again, you're listening to the new standard of three needs problem, is Graham Barton out of Duke. The second round pick would be Kingsley Suamataia, BYU, Jalen McMillan out of Washington. The other third round pick would be Taylor Demarison out of Texas Tech. And so if you went that route, you would get your center in Barton, you would get your tackle in Kingsley, you would get your wide receiver, and again, you would get your safety in the third round, and your linebacker in the fourth round, and you would take a wide receiver in the in the sixth round. I'm not sure I like this either. I'm not sure I like any of these mocks because, the Steelers didn't score points last year. And I love the fact that this draft, if you took a center, you're going to solidify the interior of the offensive line, and particularly with a short quarterback in Russell Wilson, he needs to feel comfortable, particularly from his interior. You cannot give up depth in the pocket when you have a short guy. I think that is tough. But to Double H's point, there's a lot of holes. There's a lot of holes to fill. But I'm not excited about taking two linemen first, then a wide receiver. Because again, if you take a wide receiver in the third round, Uh, I, 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 your wide receivers aren't good. I mean, I like the scenario of this if you took a center or you took an offensive lineman, particularly a center, and then a wide receiver in the second round. I think you got to get some juice. You imagine if they found someone similar to a George Pickens in the second round. When I look at these three scenarios, although I think they should not take a tackle in the first round, if you went center, then Ricky Pearsall, then Kyrie Jackson at corner, I, winner, winner, chicken dinner. So for me, the biggest need that I see on this team is at center. Center is not sexy, but again, I think if you want to get the most out of Russell Wilson, you've got to protect Russell Wilson. You've got to your interior of your offensive line cannot get pushed and not give up depth in the pocket. He needs depth and space in the pocket to operate. He is a short dude, and from what I've seen, I'll be honest, listeners. Again, you're listening to the new standard, the three needs problem. I've watched a lot of Russell Wilson in this offseason, and Russ is a tough watch. And I'm going to trust that coaches know better than me. They see it better. They know what's better. But he's a tough watch. When they talk about when your back foot hits, the ball should come out. Well, when Russ's back foot hits, the ball never comes out. It's almost as if he needs an extra beat to figure out where it's going to go. And Mike asked the question, do you think the corner out of Kentucky is fast enough? It just depends on what they ask him to do. I mean, you could run a 4-1 and be a bad corner. It just depends on what type of routes, can you get in and out of breaks when guys are making breaks on you? So I think there's more than just speed to determine, whether a corner is going to be successful. So, I mean, long story short, when I look at the Steelers, I think the Steelers are going to draft a center first. I think they want to run the football next year. And part of that is they have to secure the interior of that offensive line. For Russ's sight lines, as Double H would say, also, they want to run the football. They want to run the football. I think Arthur Smith was brought in to run the football more. So I think they are going to take a center in the first round. I'm not sure who that is going to be, but I think they are going to take a center in the first round. It's not sexy. I know I'm probably going to complain when they take a center in the first round, but I think it's what they need. They have to build. It all starts, I think, with your interior offensive line. You have to have integrity there, particularly with the short quarterback. So the last thing I want to jump into, because I posed this question on Twitter X, whatever we're calling it, is Kenny Pickett the worst Steeler first round draft pick in the last decade? Let me run through the names: Broderick Jones, Kenny Pickett, Najee Harris. They didn't have a number one pick in 2020. Claypool was the first pick in the second round. Devin Bush Jr., Terrell Edmonds, TJ Watt, Artie Burns, Bud Dupree, Ryan Shazier. Now, if you cut it at 2014, or if you take it to 2013 and include Jarvis Jones, then I think, and we'll do that. And then I think you have a couple of candidates. Ryan Shazier, absolutely not. You cannot. Ryan Shazier was fantastic. Bud Dupree, he didn't start playing well until later in his deal, but no way was Bud Dupree a bust. Artie Burns is part of the set of draft picks we can add to this list of possibly the worst in the decade first round draft picks. So we're going to put Jarvis Jones in there, and we're going to put Artie Burns. TJ Watt, I mean, come on, man. First ballot Hall of Famer. No way. Terrell Edmonds played probably about 15,000 snaps for the Steelers and started a bunch of games. Very solid player. Not an all-pro, but definitely not a bust. The other guy I think you can throw in here is possibly one of the worst draft picks in the last decade was Devin Bush Jr. Not offered a fifth-year option, out of there. And last but not least, Kenny Pickett. So, and I'm going to toss it to you guys before I give you my thoughts on who was the worst. Jarvis Jones, Artie Burns, Kenny Pickett, and or Devin Bush Jr. Now, I don't want to dig into my recency bias bag. So I'm going to say, I'm going to say Jarvis Jones. I'm going to say Jarvis Jones and Kenny Pickett are tied. I mean, given, screw that. I'm going to just say it's Kenny Pickett. Kenny Pickett's the worst first round draft pick of the last decade because to be a quarterback first round draft pick, to not get to your third year, the way that NFL salaries are structured and the importance of the quarterback position, come on, man, that's almost impossible. That's almost impossible. Yes, Kenny was not necessarily my guy. I thought Kenny had a little bit of something. Maybe I was wrong. But I'm going to say Kenny Pickett was the worst Steeler draft pick in the last decade. Come on, man. You can't only last 2 seasons and your team is like, out of here, boy. Peace out, pimpin'. I mean, you can't do that. Like, you're garbage. Like, every first rounder typically plays their entire rookie contract with their team. I mean, Justin Fields, but that's a unique situation. You know, the Bears had the 1 pick, but man, Kenny Pickett couldn't get past 2 seasons. I mean, Kenny Pickett is probably going to go down as the worst quarterback first round pick in Steeler history or recent Steeler history for sure. And because of the importance of the quarterback position, I just got to say, man, Kenny might have been the worst. Let me jump into this comment from Mike Wolf. He said, I'm not mad they drafted him. I think they had to see what he could do at the very least because we were in such a peculiar situation at the quarterback that year. I get that, Mike, and I probably said that multiple times, and I don't want to be like a revisionist history, but think about it this way, Mike, and everybody listening. Again, you're listening to the new standard, the 3 needs problem. I would have rather had Jacoby Brissett the last 2 years. Tell me I'm wrong. Tell me you would not have rather had Jacoby Brissett the last 2 years. I don't know if they were too afraid to offend Ben. I just know this. In my humble opinion, Kenny Pickett was the worst first round draft pick in the last decade. But listeners, before we get out of here, throw me some names in the chat. Who are the Steelers going to pick with their first round with the number 20th pick in the draft come Thursday? Is it going to be a trade? What's going on? Give me your names before we get out of here. If you have some names in mind, you know, who do you think the Steelers are going to draft? And do you think the Steelers to compete have to hit a home run in the draft? And again, I want to update you guys. We are going to be coming out with some shows. Obviously, on Thursday after the draft, we're going to come out with the show and talk about who the Steelers select. We're going to also come out and do with a show Friday. So we're going to have several shows talking about the Steelers draft, and then we'll sum up everything in its totality. Hopefully, we can get Neil back on for that. I'm going to reach out to him to come on and do some draft stuff. I like doing the draft stuff. I think it always is pretty fun. I don't necessarily like 7,000 mock drafts. I think mock drafts are the bane of society. Why are we killing all these trees for mock drafts? And most of them are wrong. Uh, but yes, Kenny Pickett was the worst draft pick, first round draft pick of the last decade. And I think the Steelers will draft an interior lineman, a center in the first round. Plug in the name and big up to my guy, Rashad Muhammad. Big up, fam. What's up, fam? Big up to Rashad Muhammad. If this is who I think it is, big up to you. Big up to my guy in the town. And again, Steelers are taking a center in the first round. Who it will be, I don't know. But this needs to be a meat and potatoes, pork chop draft where the Steelers get some staples and can start to move forward. Where is that? Before I get out of here, where in the world is Neil Santiago? That is a good question. Neil is still orbiting Pluto. So he'll be back, I think, this week for the draft. But with that, we're going to get out of here. And as always, thank you, Rashad Muhammad, new member. Thank you, everybody who contributed to the program. We're going to get out of here. We'll be back on Thursday. And with that, please tune in, tell a friend, and subscribe. Go Steelers.